Sculpture starts to change as we go through the late classical period. The male nude remains the predominant type, but with greater interest in movement as it affects the balance and the space surrounding the figure. Also, we see distinct individual styles beginning to emerge, and probably the biggest shift that we see is the depiction of the female nude. Here we see the Aphrodite of Knidos. This is Praxiteles' introduction of the monumental female nude, and it occurred at least 3 centuries after the introduction of its counterpart, the monumental male nude. It was, in fact, the male nude that dominated the early artistic avant-garde of the ancient world, of the archaic, of the classical, and of course we're focusing on the Greeks here. It is there that we must seek the connections and constructions which provide the background for the advent of female nudity into the mainstream of Western culture. Praxiteles, with his Aphrodite, by the way, I should note that this piece is a Roman copy. We have about 15 Roman copies. We don't have the Greek original, or at least not entirely. We have part of it. But his Aphrodite is in the condition of both complete nudity and self-conscious nakedness. When we look at her, we usually see men in the form of gods, warriors, athletes. But here we see Venus having just gotten out of the bath. Incredibly vulnerable position to be in. So it's very unusual. Her pose with head turned to the side and one hand covering the body seems to present the goddess surprised, and thus flesh the nude with a narrative and possible eroticism. Although to the Greeks, female eroticism isn't quite the same thing. To the Greeks, one marries a woman in order to breed, essentially. You would go have a girlfriend if you wanted to have love, or boyfriend, or whatever the situation might be. Here, we're seeing something showing a sense of modesty, a desire to shield the viewer from too full of a view. That's the position of the hand. But that hand also calls attention to the fact that this is a female nude. The idea of Praxiteles' nude Aphrodite covering her pubis soon became an enormous success, generating an endless stream of derivations, imitations, and replicas. In any reading, the hand that points also covers, and that which covers also points. This creates a specific form. So any woman thus fashioned is reduced to her sexuality. The immediate and long-term implication of this in the visual arts are incalculable. This is where we set the idea that the female vulva or female genitals should not be depicted in art, an idea that will hold for 2,500 years until the 1970s or later. Even today, oftentimes, if you ask someone what is or isn't obscene, this is what they will point to, whether they do so outright or not. But we also first see that genesis of something called the Venus pudica, which is a specific form. This idea of, in Western art, of a female posed in a way that covers her genitals. It's as if butts are fine, breasts, we're good with breasts, we love penises. I should rethink that sometime. But we should not depict female genitalia. And this Venus pudica, again, is something that's going to hold well into the 20th century. The resulting pose, which is not incidentally applicable to the male nude, is somewhat asymmetrical, often serving to draw one's eye to the very thing being hidden. So in the process of creating the female nude as we know it, what has happened, what Praxiteles has done, is he created a form that shields herself, shields her genitalia, reflecting that Greek idea of the woman as man incomplete, and gives us this trend throughout history. I also want to point out that when we look at her, you'll notice that for the time period, the breasts are somewhat accentuated, the hips are a little bit wider than we might see later on with like the Venus de Milo. This Aphrodite is a fertility figure. it doesn't have the idealized eroticism that we would expect. Idealization is oftentimes defined as being able to add mathematical formula, especially in the Greek world, to a sculpture, which we can't do here. And today she wouldn't be idealized. She would probably be seen as relatively average. Remember the role of Aphrodite. She is a fertility goddess before anything else, more so than a goddess of love or eroticism. So in the Greek world, it makes sense to focus on those elements that would allow for a pregnancy and allow her to feed the child afterwards, which is what we see here in the Aphrodite of Knidos, this very revolutionary form of the first female nude.